Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of A Future Date. My name is Sophia Morgan, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm one of the volunteers who's been working on the program committee for A Future Date. A Future Date is a volunteer-led, free virtual accessibility conference with the goal of providing a platform to host some of the sessions that have been canceled as of recent. During times like this, we're really grateful for the global community of accessibility and the technologies that keep us connected. And now more than ever, it's crucial that our technologies and digital experiences are accessible and inclusive to all. So huge thank you to all of the volunteers who've helped organize this conference, our speakers for sharing their wisdom, and 3Play Media for their captioning services, as well as Basecamp for providing their project management tool. We've got a really great program today of sessions spanning our accessibility techniques and accessibility programs tracks, so we hope you learned something useful today.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. We hope you're all doing well out there in the current climate, and thank you for joining us for a virtual presentation today. We want to thank the organizers of the Future Date conference for setting up this platform for us. We want to ask you all, if you have any questions, please feel free to pose them in the chat function. We'll be online during the session to respond to questions as we go along. So that we'll get started. So today we'll be talking about making artificial intelligence, or AI, inclusive for hiring and HR professionals. My name is Nathan Cunningham. I'm a policy advisor in the US Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy.
And my name is Corinne Weibel. I'm the co-director of the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology.
And my name is Jutta Tavaranos, and I'm the director of the Inclusive Design Research Center at OCAD University.
Awesome, thank you all for joining us for the presentation. So Corinne and I work with ODEP and an organization called PEAT, and our mission is really focused on ensuring that workplace technology is accessible for people with disabilities. In the past year, PEAT has started shifting its focus a little bit to emerging technologies such as AI. And you can see up in the top right of the slides, PEAT's tagline is building a future that works. So we're really interested in making sure that these new technologies coming out are inclusive and accessible for people with disabilities to succeed in the workplace. Next slide. So throughout the presentation today, we'll be sharing some information on AI, some overall basics about the technology. We'll also be covering AI in an HR context specifically and walking you through ways that it's being used in the pre-screening and interview processes. We'll touch on areas of bias and concerns around the way that AI is being used in HR contexts and give you some ideas about how to address those issues. We'll also touch on the legal landscape and finally close with some questions you can pose your vendors to make sure the technology you're procuring is accessible. So just to start out, we want to give a foundation of technology and the employment gap. So what does that mean exactly? In the United States, the unemployment rate of people with disabilities is 7.3% and 3.5% for those without disabilities. So there's a gap here, and we're seeing ways that we can use technology to help close this gap. On the left, we have a graphic. It shows a purple circle. This circle represents the global population of people with disabilities. Now take 60% of that circle, or almost 2/3, and you've got the working age population of people with disabilities. Only 20% of that working age population is actually in the workforce today. But Accenture has found that advances in technology can enable 55% of this working age population of people with disabilities to join the workforce. So you can really up the numbers through using technology responsibly and ethically. And this can add $23 billion to the global economy overall. Next slide. So what exactly is artificial intelligence, and what are some ways that it's showing promise for use in the workplace? Artificial intelligence generally refers to technologies that use computer systems to take the place of human intelligence or human sensing. So it's software that can learn to process images you see, sounds you hear, or linguistic expressions you understand. And all of these can benefit, including people with disabilities in the workplace. So there are some main umbrellas of AI technologies. It's quite broad that I've included here. Number one is computer vision. Autonomous vehicles are a good example of this because they rely on many kinds of computer vision to operate safely. Think about the ways that they use body recognition software to identify pedestrians and cyclists. And you want to make sure the data that they're getting to learn from includes pedestrians with disabilities, such as wheelchair users or cane users, so that they can operate safely. Number two is speech systems. These are any kind of text to speech, or the reverse of that, speech to text software that's being used. You might use your phone in this way. You might talk into your phone instead of typing into it. And AI is recording what you're saying down into the text interface or the web search interface. There are applications for this in the workplace as well. You can imagine ways that in meetings, people who are deaf or hard of hearing or people with cognitive disabilities might need real-time and automated captioning in order to get information from various presenters. So AI, if it's done well, can really play an important role in that. Number three is text processing systems. These are ways that large streams of text information can be condensed down automatically into summaries using AI technologies. You might use these in an HR context if you're trying to screen resumes. You're interpreting information on a candidate's resume through an AI model and then pulling out the most important parts. This can also be useful for people with cognitive disabilities or people who are just busy and want some kind of summary of the information. Finally, the fourth one here is chatbots and conversational agents. We're seeing these used in customer service contexts. People are interacting with those kinds of chatbots to get information and answers to simple questions. And we're also seeing them starting to become used in HR contexts so that prospective candidates can interact with the chatbot and get answers to some of their simpler questions. Next slide. So what about AI in the HR context more specifically? This is where the kind of machine learning and predictive analytics side of AI comes into play. And we could spend the whole presentation talking about this topic. It's really quite fascinating, but I'll try to condense it. And I know Yuta will probably touch on it a little more later on. And it's the idea that you're taking a model that you've developed and putting training data into it. So you might want it to identify candidates that are good fits for the job that you're putting out there. So you're trying to train the model based on what you think a good candidate will look like. And then you're sending that model out into the world and having it encounter new data. It's testing on that data and it's trying to come back with accurate results to match what you're looking for. According to the LinkedIn 2018 Global Recruiting Trends Report, 35% of those who responded said that AI is a top trend affecting how they hire. This number is not huge at this moment. We're kind of seeing that AI is on the cusp of really breaking into the HR space, and that's what's reflected in the Deloitte 2019 Global Human Capital Trends Report, where 81% of respondents predicted that their use of AI will grow in the future. And with us being on the cusp of that, that's kind of where Pete's interest is. We want to make sure as the technology is rolled out, that it's inclusive and accessible for people with disabilities. The last thing I'll say here is it's kind of interesting to note that 56% of the hiring professionals in the LinkedIn study also noted that new interview tools are a top trend affecting how they hire. So we're seeing ways that AI coming into the interview space is kind of causing us to rethink some of the ways that we're conducting interviews. So we might introduce online skills assessments or job auditions or even video interviews that are analyzed by AI technologies. And we need to make sure in doing so that some of the human error and human bias that is present in analyzing interviews does not then carry over into the AI systems that we're building and pushing out. So with that, I'll turn it over to Corinne to talk more about the details of AI in pre-screening and interviewing candidates.
Thanks so much, Nathan. This is Corinne. Next slide, please. So as Nathan was saying, Pete, the Partnership on Employment and Technology, has been very interested in the increased use of AI. We have been focused on a lot of related issues over the years, such as accessibility of online job applications, and if candidates are actually able to all access the same digital documents they need to in order to be considered for jobs. And I think with AI in general, people are very interested in the possibility of automating repetitive tasks, in increasing productivity. But there is also this real interest in the idea of reimagining work. And HR professionals are very interested in the possibilities data is offering to really better predict hiring outcomes. So you're seeing a lot of new platforms focused on predictive assessments through the use of proprietary algorithms. Prescreening candidates is one of probably the biggest growth areas because it enables hiring managers to very quickly to sort a great volume of applicants and contacts. And they are increasingly interested in soft skills. Like, this is a real interest area in general. Traits like teamwork or curiosity, the term culture fit comes up a lot. And people are very interested in this idea that a machine might be able to make these sorts of assessments too. So you see a lot of tools that are scanning resumes. There's also a lot of platforms that are working to scan current employees with the idea that they can identify a person for a promotion or identify when someone when there's a skills gap and somebody is in need of training, with the idea that this will increase retention. And they're also using these tools to analyze current job descriptions and to determine the success rates of past hires when determining their strategies for seeking new hires. And this strategy often feeds into the first, that this sort of data that a company might be looking at who they've hired in the past to determine who will be a successful candidate in the future, which of course is a complicated idea when you look at from a disability inclusion lens. If a company has not traditionally hired a lot of people with disabilities, they might not be in that data. But Yuda will be talking about that more. Next slide. So the interview process also involves a lot of these platforms, and in particular, video interviews are rising in popularity, and with it, these also contain algorithms that are actually making predictive assessments themselves by analyzing facial expressions, vocal tone, and word choice. And with this, this assessment claims to be able to suss out those soft skills that I was mentioning earlier. For example, the idea that it can give a sense of someone's emotional intelligence or interpersonal skills or honesty. And of course, this raises a lot of questions as well. For example, an autistic candidate or a candidate who maybe has had a stroke in the past, there's a question of whether they've been considered, if those use case scenarios have been considered. There's also a lot of game-based pre-test assessments. These are very popular in the hiring world for really even the past decade. So these are tools that it's a gamified approach, testing out logic or problem solving, and also a predictor of a successful hire. And a lot of this is an accessibility consideration, because sometimes we're seeing that these tools have considered some disabilities, like they might have considered whether somebody is colorblind or if they're using a screen reader, but it might not be in every case. And it also raises the question of if a candidate cannot take a test provided such as this, is there an equivalent test they can take? And if there isn't, does that affect how the candidate is assessed compared to the other candidates? Another accessibility issue comes up with chatbots, which are increasingly part of recruiting websites. And these streamline the initial communications process. HR professionals will tell you they increase engagement with prospective candidates and lead to more people applying to jobs. But of course, if they're a required part of the interview process and the application process, they need to be fully accessible. And so it does raise that question of what happens if they aren't. And in all of these questions, there's also the question of how someone with a disability can request an accommodation, and even to understand when they need to. For example, with a video interview, they may not realize that there's an algorithm involved. Next slide, please. And so this also circles back to the question of why are HR professionals using this AI? And probably the top primary reason is that there is a significant increase in efficiency and cost savings because they can process such an enormous volume of data and analyze it so quickly. But beyond that, we're hearing from a lot of companies that they believe it helps to meet their diversity and inclusion goals, with the idea that if they are trying to target and recruit specific diverse candidates, these type of approaches, if customized, help them do that they help them meet their Section 501 hiring quotas. And there's also very strongly a belief that humans are biased, which of course is true, and that these types of solutions are looked to with the idea that it reduces human error, it's as well as unconscious bias and nepotism. So that's it raises a big question, because there is also the question of are these fully free of bias themselves? And with that, I will hand this over to Yuta to discuss that question in further detail.